Hopefully that's we're starting recording. Excellent. Cool. Okay, so I'm sure more people will turn up, but let's get started properly. So, did that share? I'm not sure that did share. Let's try again. There we go. That looks better. Good. So we have community updates. Let's start there. So Lillian, you have interns.
Yes.
How are they going?
Day one, and already we've caught some errors on our overleaf template, so that's being corrected. And we've got a big push to ask all our lecturers to for us to help them update their LaTeX files to the latest standards, because that way we can almost guarantee that we're off to a good start. And yeah, my intern's still working on the guide for RStudio for the blind, which hopefully will be useful. And if you do know any blind students who use Braille and JAWS who are interested in data analysis, then they'd be really good to test out the guide.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Cool. Matt is working on Matthew Wrapper. I cannot read today. Maths Picks Wrapper. And adding an alt text workflow and various other fun things. Anything you want to particularly pick out?
I'll probably skip the math picks because I've talked more about it before. I know Sharon, this isn't music, but music and maths have a lot of interesting relationships. So I know Sharon in particular had been asking before about music accessibility, and I've now been approached by a computer science team looking for projects for their third year students. So I wanted to start looking at music once done a good bit on maths, so I'm proposing a nice workflow, sheet music through OMR to music XML, and then from that to accessible PDF and lots of other alternative formats. I've done a proof of concept, can get the PDF workflow working as good as it can and getting a 100% ally score. But PDF tags, there's no PDF tags for music, so really it's about what further alternative formats you can then create. So things like modified staff notation, and there's a thing of like adding certain colors to certain notes, or there's all sorts of stuff you can do. But the key thing is getting it into music XML. And probably the most interesting thing from the user interface is, since most of the open source optical music recognition tools are about 80% accurate, it's designing a really good user interface for staff to fix the accuracy, and then potentially using AI to fix the accuracy as well, based on what I've been doing with integrating AI with MathPicks as well. And maybe the other thing I'd talk about is maybe there's other mathematicians, when I say Hagoromo, they might just go, well, yes, ban Crayola. Crayola is the devil. Because that's what I've been learning about, been doing a deep dive into why we get so many complaints about maths Panopto recordings. And apparently there was a very bad batch of Crayola going around. And half the department is now buying Hagoromo, but the university refuses to because it's like 4 times as expensive or something. So yeah, that's just interesting. I'll stop there before I waffle on even further.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think maths lectures and Panopto seem to have a almost unique issues, regardless of that's now talking across 4 institutions. It's always the maths lectures, but maybe that says as much about maths lecturing as it does about content. Cool. Constantina also has some interns. Do you want to mention anything about that?
No, it's not me who has the interns. Thanks God, because I'm away from next week for a whole month. So no, it's a colleague in physics who I'm not even sure if he has the inders or the inders are actually from LTW, you know, a central IS. Anyway, they work on looking into Learn Ultra of how people can write LaTeX and math content there, and a bit more about accessibility in Learn Ultra. So yes, we don't use Learn Ultra that much for our content because we use it as a portal into Moodle to use Stack, but like physics, they start using Stack more. But anyways, physics, chemistry, biology, that they need some math content for chemical formula and equations, things like that. So they do have problem with LaTeX in Learn, like actually writing in the Learn editor, which I'm not familiar with because I don't use Learn myself. So anyway, we'll have some results or some outcomes. Sorry, my kid's crying downstairs with a nanny, so it's nothing sinister happening in my house. They're just having a fight, okay? Because my daughter is off school. School holiday started last week, and thanks God we're off to Greece on Sunday. So that's
Wow.
me.
Enjoy Greece. Yeah, summer holidays definitely looming. Tucker, unfortunately, is not doing anything mathsy at the moment. Anything you want to throw in? No, fair enough. So we then have Kieran, who's working on 2 Xerti projects, graphing in Excel and medical calculations for nursing students. I think nursing students and maths is always a really interesting place. I'm always interested to hear projects going on there. Anything else you want to add there, Kieran, or give a few more details?
I suppose that they're a little bit strange coming, and I've said before, maybe I don't know who kind of is always in these meetings, but I'm coming as a secondary school maths teacher background. So I'm not a stranger to, kind of a pair of scissors and a glue stick when it comes to, kind of accessibility. And I've often kind of done very practical things. But in my new role at Ulster, I'm having to learn digital accessibility. So kind of it's a very different approach. So it's very beginner, but we have someone in our team who has a strong background in student welfare and well-being, is how it started. So she keeps us all right. And so she has directed us to Xerte, thinking it's a very good platform with its inbuilt accessibility checker. Although I'm led to believe that not all accessibility checkers were created equal. I think I've been around just a little bit long enough to have picked up on that one. But it seems to be working. But what I'm finding is I'm having to use an awful lot of click on the source and go to the source code because it can't do what I want it to do. It won't display the maths the way I want. It's very restricted in terms of what it can display. So I'm working with an AI engine that's like, give me a code where it looks like this, increase the spacing in fractions, and no, even just kind of that presentation and the visual thing. But that seems to be working. But no, accessibility checker is telling me that that is still accessible. I suppose it would be good even just to get a shot across the bows if I'm doing the wrong thing, if anybody knows enough to direct me or redirect me on that one would be useful. But so no, it's nice, and I think the stress for a lot of nursing students is that they have to get 100% in their exam. So they just need an awful lot of support and practice around that. And people are often shocked whenever you tell them they need 100% until you say, well, like, how many people can you give the wrong medication to before you have to reconsider? Like, you can't afford one out of 100. You can't get away with 1%. So they're actually very good, but that's actually been quite a nice one because I've got lots of self-assessment checks and stuff, which is nice from a mathsy point of view. I always like to go this is what you do, this is how you do it, here's an example, now you have a go. And so it seems to be working quite well to fit all 4 of those kind of aspects in.
That sounds lots of fun. I think Xerti is not overly widely used, but everywhere it's used, it seems to work quite happily. Does anyone have maybe any tips or anything they maybe want to respond to that, Karen?
Sorry, I missed what the problem was with using Xerti for your resources.
Sorry?
I missed what the problem was with using Xerti for your resources.
I suppose I didn't see a problem. The problem came in the functionality, but I seem to be trying to get around that by going into the source code and putting in the coding at the kind of at the source, and I'm just wondering, is that undermining the accessibility, even though Zerte obviously is telling me no problems here when I check on a page, but I'm wondering, is me going into the background source code getting around the accessibility checker, or is it still, because I mean everything I do has to tick the boxes passing accessibility check, which is strange when I see other resources around the university, but obviously we're leading by example. I just wanted to make sure that by going to the source code on Zerte, as opposed to using their tools and menus and functions, I'm just wanting to make sure that I'm not undermining the accessibility checker whenever it tells me that it's all okay.
It should be all right, but it depends on what you add in the source code, as with everything else. But yeah, feel free to ping me if you want to just have a chat outside this about. And I have access to the Zerte gurus, so.
Thank you.
Okay, so then we have Robert. Yeah, attended lots of events recently. I think we saw each other 3 times in 1 week. But yes, it's been that season of traveling around. Is there anything you want to add, or are we all?
No, I'm good.
Good. Okay, so then Evie, currently working on developing resources for accessibility for maths teachers. Yes, we all like the stage where you're questioning every single decision. How's that going? That's really interesting. We don't normally talk about maths accessibility further down the pipeline, but yeah. How's it going?
It's going okay, considering all the things that are new to me. So I'm currently struggling to figure out what part of what I know for myself might be useful to student teachers. So not just any teachers, but those who just starting. So it's a bit tricky, but it's also very fun. So I think it's getting there. And the only other thing that I didn't realize at the time, I think, was that I had to consider what my colleagues know about math accessibility. So yeah, the project became larger than I originally thought it was going to be. So I'm glad I'm here today, and hi all.
You're very welcome. It's always nice to branch out more. Does anyone else have anything else to add that I might cover, because I'm in my actual job? I'm doing some stuff with Teacher CPT too, so I might come and email you at some point and have a discussion instead of replicating work. But does anyone else have anything else they want to throw in? No. Josh, then, a nice numbered list. So you've got some interns, some guidance, and more interns. How's all that going?
It's good. Yep, just trying to cram everything in before the summer holidays. And like, this is always the time I sort of promise I'd do all my work, because there's no teaching going on, but it never works out. So just trying to squeeze things in.
Yep. Yeah, I think we're all probably at that point. And Antonio similarly doesn't have anything. Who's waiting in the lobby? Sorry, there we go. Yes, Antonio also has no accessible maths, just busy with other task exams. I think we're all at that point where we're just tired, end of year, catching up. Christian, starting to rewrite Numbers editor to improve accessibility. Yes, I imagine that is a very, very, very large job. How's it going at the beginning of that?
Yeah. So last year I rewrote the student interface from scratch, which I think has really improved accessibility. But it's always been my quiet shame that the editor isn't particularly accessible. I haven't really made big structural changes in like a decade. So a week or so ago, with nothing else on my to-do list, I thought I'll just get started on it. So I imagine this is going to be the next year of my life or something. yeah, but there you go.
Well, I'm sure this group in particular will be keen on those updates for the next year or beyond.
Yeah. There was a good point at the dig act, whatever, however you say it. Someone made a point about accessibility of the editing tools for things, which is really what shamed me into starting this. That, of course, it's not just students who have access needs.
Yeah, and I think, again, another event lots of us were at, the accessibility of staff is increasingly accessibility for staff. It's also something that needs a lot of consideration, especially when we're designing tools and things. Excellent. Another number to list from Bex. Thank you for recent events, using notes learning and not strictly maths, but started conversations about making accessibility communities a practice at the university. How is that going? It's always useful to start a new community.
Oh, yes. It's going slowly, but if anybody has any advice or learnings from their own university, it was actually one of, I think, the learning technologist versions of this that sparked the conversation between a colleague and myself. So very thankful for that. But yeah, we're just trying to get buy-in from across the university at this point to make something informal.
Yep, I think that's interestingly, I got a proposal for exactly the same thing at Imperial just this morning.
Wonderful.
So yeah, definitely if your university doesn't have some kind of community, it's definitely worth thinking about how we can better support ourselves, not just in maths, but beyond too. Lots of these lessons are common. Cool. Okay, and then last one, presenting at July workshop at our College of Engineering and Physical Sciences to cover LaTeX to tagging. Basics for Word, basics for digital, checking accessibility, and so on. How is all of that going? Yeah.
I'm just preparing for this workshop, and please wish me luck.
Good luck.
Thank you. I will report back in the next meeting.
That's always good. I think the key thing I've learned from running things like that is nothing is too basic. Always start further back than you think you need. Excellent.
Thanks,
Right, well,
Cornelia. Yep.
we've kind of raced through those. Does anyone else have anything they want to bring up related to anything there, or? Okay, I think it's just the tired end of year bit. So the thing I thought we could discuss a bit today then is something that was kind of bubbling through lots of events, but not necessarily talked about in any of the events, was there's been a big Microsoft accessibility update in the last couple of months, to the point now where actually I've heard mathematicians talk about, under their breath in hidden corners, potentially using Word, which I have not heard ever. So I thought it might be worth us having a bit of a conversation about where we are with all of this, and maybe any problems or pitfalls, or whether this or what's going on. Has anyone? Is this a hallucination, or have other people kind of heard similar murmurings?
I've heard the same thing, Cordelia, but probably I remember it in as much detail as you do.
Fair enough. I'm trying to actually remember the exact university where someone said their maths department was moving to Word, which was slightly shocking. I think Word accessibility is I think we've long Sharon, yes. Sharon, do you want to say something?
Yes, Word. One, there's a new program. There's a online class called Founders, and I'll put it in the chat. I haven't taken it yet. I just found it and will be doing it. But we have actually found Word quite accessible because it's text-based. It's not good for advanced math, but it's and okay, I'm not a mathematician. Let me just get that out there right now. But it sure takes you far fast, so that you really don't have to train people. You just tell them use the equation editor, and we use Canvas learning management system. It's very easy to copy and paste from Word into Canvas and have it accessible, and we use Ally to measure. And it's just wonderfully accessible for low level math.
Yeah, I think
Thank you.
that's very, thank you, Sharon. I think that's very much where I think lots of us have kind of had it. It's useful for maybe not direct maths degrees or kind of that middle place. I know when I was note taking, students really like Word because they're familiar with it and they can edit it. So I think that's often another reason to use Word. Lillian?
Yeah, I was just looking for something from Daisy Consortium. Got it. Hang on. I found my link. I'm just looking in my digital brain. So there is a very active community that looks at anything to do with maths and support needed in maths, in Word, maths plus Word, GitHub. Hang on, I'll just link it. And basically, if you find anything that irks you in maths around accessibility or around, just being able to do anything mathematical, you've got that GitHub and you can actually kind of complain about it, and it does get they are quite active. I've linked to something in 2024, but you can easily go back up to the overall thread and you can see that they are working on these issues. And I think it's useful to keep an eye on the things that they are trying to sort in Word. Certainly in my experience, depending on the user needs, but almost all the blind students who learn maths do it in Word. The problem is the transition to uni, where, as Sharon said, the maths level gets way too complex. They would have to learn so much LaTeX in order to type it into the Word. But then what comes out on their Braille display isn't LaTeX, it's the coded Braille math. So then they're having to learn two different languages on top of the maths, if you think of maths as the third language. So they're having to learn three languages in order to learn the concepts. That's the challenge. But yeah, that's why we tend to have transcribers, like Cordelia mentioned, support workers, to simplify the maths into single line so it's easier. So yeah, I can talk about this till the cows come home, so don't get me started.
That's another benefit to I mean, Word's very good with Unicode, and actually their maths equation editor, I'm pretty sure, can automatically translate from LaTeX and kind of nice printing straight to Unicode. So if you're trying to do that translation, that is a lot easier through something like that. Robert. Oh, I think you're currently muted.
I took my hand down and then thought I've clicked all the buttons I need to click and started talking. Thinking specifically about accessibility for staff rather than thinking about accessibility for students, a big challenge for me individually as a dyslexic person is reading handwritten stuff written mostly by dyslexic students. It's an irony that they're the worst ones to get on with. We asked them to write their projects and their work in Overleaf, thinking, well, one, this LaTeX a mathematical skill, but I don't know how true that is if you're not going to stay in academic maths. If you're going into industry, it's probably not the most useful skill, and whether it's more feasible to say, oh, please submit your work in Word rather than handwritten stuff, particularly sort of first year, more basic problem sheets, whether that's a more realistic ask. And in particular, because when they do it in, I feel like it's enough to do it in LaTeX, but then to ask them to ask students to do and here's how you link your overleaf to GitHub and do a bookml compilation, or this is how you put it into the Chirun, or this is how you install Pandoc, is probably too much of an ask. So that's my thoughts on Word at the moment.
I mean, Word as a whole thing is more accessible and easier to convert to different formats, accessible formats. So that, yeah, you're right. That's a very
it's the submission process as well that's been really worrying me as well, because Turnitin will accept Word and Gradescope will accept Word, but they won't accept a SCORM package or a .html file as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sharon, you.
Yeah, there was one thing I forgot to mention, and it's not Word specific, it's about Microsoft. A few years ago, Microsoft acquired Dragon Naturally Speaking. And I forget what the instance was, but I forgot that I was not in accessibility mode. And I started using some Dragon Naturally Speaking commands to a Microsoft product. I forget what it was, and it worked. So the point being, it may be a way around of the multiple transcriptions, translations and transcriptions that are involved with making math accessible, at least on some level. If it responds to voice command, because Microsoft has integrated the capabilities of Dragon Naturally Speaking, that too is an asset. So thank you.
Yeah, I think this is, yeah, that's very much, Microsoft has a very low entry bar and it is highly compatible with many, many other things. Cool. I can't remember, I think it was someone from the LaTeX project. Was it David or Frank who, at some meeting, I think it was maybe Dijak again, mentioned that this big Word update, and was saying maybe it was partly due to LaTeX, the work they'd been doing there. Are either of them there? Do they know more about this? No? Fair enough. Okay, Constantina's in the chat has said she can't write anything longer than 2 pages in Word. Fair enough. Why? Because I've not used Word in ages. Again, I've used it to maybe fill in some forms. I feel like you get discouraged from Word. Maybe that's going back to Robert's point.
I don't know why. Yeah. Maybe I'm used now to have everything in overleaf, and Word seems counterintuitive. I can't even find buttons on the top of things I need to do. Yeah, even PowerPoint. I only use PowerPoint to crop images. Can you believe that? Crop image and send it to someone, nothing else. So yes, I'm a very bad person related to math accessibility, that I can't use these simple tools anymore.
No, I think this is that picks up on a good point from the survey we did a couple of years ago, where I think the most interesting question was, what software do you use the most? And it was kind of like, if you looked at lecturers and learning technologists, they were kind of like inverse, whether they kind of some meeting in the middle with like markdown things, and then generally learning technologists were using things like Word, and generally lecturers were using things like Overleaf, and it was almost mirror images of each other. So kind of big disconnect. So I imagine there are lots of learning technologies here going, why are we even having this discussion?
So fun, because now I'm under the umbrella of learning technologies, but I haven't used all the other tools. I only use the tools that academic use because of my other stuff that I'm doing.
Yeah. And I think that's very much a kind of, maybe a kind of math specialist thing, and a more general point. Cool. Does anyone else, so this kind of Has anyone else typed some really advanced maths into Word recently then? If they've apparently got to the point where maths departments are whispering that they could be used for maths degrees, that would kind of suggest the maths editors gained some capability. Has anyone experimented with any of that?
You need to be on the beta channel still, which I haven't got for the latest. But I have seen it demonstrated. It looks quite good.
And was that demonstration impressive? Was that kind of a lot
Yeah,
more maths?
Peter Wu at Microsoft's done a good job overhauling the LaTeX import and output and the way the PDFs, the maths added to the PDF. I mean, of course, it's still Word. I can't use it. I mean, it's not Emacs, but yeah, it's for Word users. It's a big improvement when it rolls out. Sorry,
Okay.
I've only just joined. I just noticed your.
No, thank you. That's useful. Kieran.
I was just going to say that this year I delivered math support to the whole of the first year of engineering students on their maths modules, and I used Word and the new equation editor when doing my materials, and I thought it was lovely. Now, as we just heard, I think because I'm a traditional Word user, maybe I just have a different appreciation for it, but I find it so, I mean, I was doing like from vectors to matrices, there was nothing that I was looking for that I couldn't find and that wasn't really nice and straightforward to use and to lay out, and already has the accessibility improvements, obviously, that come with what they've done. But I thought it was really nice for somebody who's grown up since Windows 95 and typing around on some version of Word or Microsoft Works even at one point. So I'm very habituated to it, and it's quite a nice move to incorporate the maths in a way that they haven't before.
I think that's definitely true. It is yeah, it's definitely something that if you're used to it, it can be quite intuitive. I'm also interested in this kind of going back to what we were discussing earlier with maybe maths at a slightly earlier stage than university. I imagine lots of school teachers are probably disproportionately using Word and PowerPoint and not using Overleaf. So maybe that's another thing to consider when we're writing accessibility guidance. They're not necessarily going to be using there. I was also going to mention something about a point Rob had raised. Does anyone try to write maths on PowerPoint? That's a good question. We're kind of talking about Word, but I guess it's kind of common across all of Microsoft. Does anyone teach with PowerPoints? I mean, we often talk about the accessibility of Beamer, or we avoid talking about the accessibility of Beamer.
Plenty of people here, well, not plenty, enough people to cause me a problem here use PowerPoint for their teaching. And I think as a rule, they are not thinking about accessibility.
Okay, they're not thinking about accessibility. Are they producing accessible things without thinking about accessibility, though? Absolutely not. Okay. That's also worth knowing. Yeah, I guess much like Constantina, I often use PowerPoint to edit images. So if PowerPoint may be good from that point of view, but not if I'm putting maths in. Matthew.
Not someone that's using it for teaching, but just to share some experience of what I've come across. I've been working with a lecturer in engineering, and we're creating what we call it like a typology of how people are using maths in different ways in Office tools. And what was really interesting was seeing some bits. It was a screenshot of an equation. Some was a screen or like a capture of some handwriting. Sometimes it was using the equation editor, but what really struck me was when he was adding little shapes, because he didn't like the way that the equation editor put certain, I think it was a dot over the letter M, and he felt it was always moving into the wrong place. And so he was drawing a shape with the shapes tool and then dragging that over the equation. But the workflow this is why I started getting into MathPix, is we can take that PowerPoint file and it can deal with all of that and then create an accessible PowerPoint version. which then just needs tidying up to match the look. But so it's almost like I'm taking a printout of the PowerPoint and then running it through rather than trying to make it accessible from the beginning, because he didn't like the interface and didn't like how it did things. So that was the main takeaway for me, was drawing a little shape just to get the equation to look just how you liked. And that was maybe that was also the person who writes all his pi symbols in a way that looks like 55, so, or 2 5s put together. So that's what made me look for the AI solution for correcting those kinds of things in context. But just a random aside.
Useful, and actually does raise that point that that's one of the reasons we use PowerPoint, because actually the last time I used PowerPoint was to do a demonstration about why maths is hard to make accessible, because it was the quickest way I could make inaccessible maths. So especially for a presentation. So that was, yeah. Anyway, Frank.
Yeah, quick note on what you just said a minute ago about not talking about Beamer accessibility. I just would want to repeat that there is this Beamer replacement, and it's already working very nicely. I just made a presentation for the conference in Calgary, and I put the link in there. And you can make accessible presentations out of it, and it's getting better and better in terms of also supporting sort of layout styles. It's not there yet in comparison to Beamer, but if you want to have your lectures being done with math and everything, that's extremely easy to do, and it works. What doesn't work, and this is not so much about Beamer or this new class in LaTeX, but in general, a question about how to translate presentational approaches like overlaying things, moving things around. What should that mean in terms of accessibility? And I was struggling with this talk in that respect as well, because I used a lot of overlays like revealing text bits by bits. That works nicely, but then also replacing text on the same slide. And then the big question is, how do you translate that into an accessible solution? If you do that automatically, and David got sidetracked by me because I asked him to check it out in NVDA.
That goes me a couple of days of time that I never get back.
The problem was that the class is then showing the final results only. So you get 5 pages where you actually have to press forward, and because it doesn't contain any accessible content, it's just an empty slide, so to speak, because it's just the overlay thing. So there's a huge sort of general question about how do you translate presentations into accessible output that works on both sides, because you want to have this kind of visual approach for people who are visual in the oriented in the audience, because it helps them not to see too much text in one go. But something else is necessary if you want to translate to a different format, like, for example, reading it with an AT tool, or navigating it with an AT tool. And that's completely open question. So it's PowerPoint would be the same. If you have flying sources coming from all sides into your presentation, then of course, what do you do with those?
Yeah, I think that's actually a very good. I've recently taught a lecture course, and I finished my slides and then went to put them online and realized these don't work, and had to essentially produce a kind of second set of slides for just to share afterwards. They were different from the ones I delivered because they kind of didn't work reading them separately. So part of it is the question of the presentation of slides, particularly for maths, is very different to reading through a presentation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Sorry,
I
keep
mean,
going.
this slide deck there is 14 pages, and the one that I'm going to present is 100 pages. So you can imagine the difference. But it's the same content. So there's really research questions that need to be answered, and working very directly with the accessibility community, with people who are actually sort of not what we think they should get presented, but what they want to get presented, and that's something that really needs doing. And so far, I think nobody seriously has started to think about it.
I think that's a good one. Does anyone else in the group have any kind of, obviously we don't need to solve this problem in the next 10 odd minutes, but does anyone else have some thoughts about that? I like Christian's comment about the difference between Jurassic Park the book and Jurassic Park the movie. I guess it's
someone at the LMS thing, whenever that was recently, asked, is it better to have handwritten presentation or slides? And I said there isn't a better. I think both have their benefits, and I think this is that thing again. Ideally, you would make several versions of the same information to be consumed in different ways, but practically we don't have the time and have to reuse your slides as a reference for after the lecture, or I don't know, present terrible slides that are quite good notes.
David?
Yeah, I mean, those of you who attended the webinar last month was also LaTeX talk slides. I mean, both Beamer and LaTeX talk, you can make a handout, so basically like an article, which is obviously not easy to make readable. But if you actually want to make the talk itself navigable with a screen reader, it's now that's the problem is you can always make another version, but like if the person presenting is blind, for example, and actually wants to use the screen reader to present, it's not at all clear what you should do. And also, as Frank and I found to our pain last week, there are browser implementation issues that mean you just can't get off page one, it turns out, if you've got more than 50 pages in the document, which is sort of a problem. So yeah, I think knowing how far it's possible to use a screen reader for the actual presentation form when you've got overlays and, let's say, moving text. Be interested whether people, what people expect.
I guess from the kind of teaching staff point of view, and from, although other people can pull in, do people, if they do have kind of overlays and kind of animations, when they upload those notes, do they keep them, or do they kind of do it as a kind of note form with maybe some bullet points that don't appear one by one? I'm trying to think what I do now.
I've had this discussion a couple of times with lecturers here who have got like a short video clip or something that's animated, and in the past I have just told them to describe in words what happens, and that's what we tend to put in the readable version of the thing.
Yeah, and I guess this also kind of goes back to that earlier, but keep going around a circle state about Panopto and the accessibility of lecture recordings, and how that is a format in itself. Not one we so much talk about in this group, but it is an important one. Some academics still prefer Blackboard and chalk. Yes, they do, which brings us back to the chalk point. There is also, moving to kind of visualizers too, there is a pedagogical reason why that's true. There is lots of research about why maths is best learned at the pace of handwriting. So again, how do people kind of square that circle where maybe you've got a presentation, you've got some slides or something, they're accessible, but then part of it you did a calculation and you did it even using a visualizer on paper nicely. How how do people then do that? I always feel a bit guilty because I'm like, oh, I'm scanning this in, and I feel, you know, my accessibility hackles get up. But Robert.
Even before the accessibility issue, I find switching between formats very hard to manage when I'm lecturing. It's the I get, you know how it is when you're like trying to get a Teams call to working. I don't want that when I'm also in middle of an example as well. So I use a visualizer because it gets caught by the camera much more reliably. And we've just had new visualizers installed where you can lock the autofocus. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me. I do scan in the physical writing that I do. I should look into MathPix as Matthew keeps advising. So maybe I can get a more accessible version of the handwriting from that. But it's always only to supplement the lecture notes, which are in HTML. It's exactly the same thing. So I don't feel too guilty about it.
I guess this whole conversation we are kind of talking about supplementary material. So you're right, there should be some kind of gold standard accessible thing there already. I agree with MathPix. I slightly have a problem sometimes, particularly when I'm doing a calculation by hand. You know, I'm crossing stuff up or I'm trying to explain a calculation. So sometimes maybe there's a weird drawing that doesn't actually make sense unless you watch me do the weird drawing. There are weird arrows between stuff. But yeah. Okay, does anyone else have anything they want to bring up, add to this discussion? Constantina's off. Bye, Constantina.
Bye.
Matthew.
I was just thinking about what you said about crossing out and so on. There's just being at the top of my head and not being a maths teacher, but you might need to do it in a separate way. But if you thought this is the first line, so this is what I do on this line, and then I'm going to do it again, but I'm going to cross it out, and then on the next line, just as like you were kind of doing a stop motion animation, but each line is like part of the transformation of what you're trying to show. That once you then convert that, because there is a strike through and that kind of thing. Of course, it depends if you're then drawing arrows that are circling around, that might not work so well, but because I often have to think about accessibility is more about turning something that isn't linear necessarily into something linear. And that's the imagination of trying to think how can you approach it in that way. Random thoughts to fill in the silence, back to you.
See, and it goes back to that point of overlays, that sometimes those overlays aren't just bringing up the next bullet point, they are materially information in themselves. They are, you know, a crossing through of something. They are animation of a thought process. Okay. Any closing thoughts for the academic year? I have one. Does anyone want to be a little co-chair with me? It would be really nice to have someone to help manage some stuff. It's quite a lot just for me, and yes, please do send me an email if you'd be interested in maybe getting a bit more involved. It's generally quite fun, but easier done with two people. So all volunteers welcome, or you don't have to be a full, you could be a deputy chair, you could, you know, anyone, helpful hand. That's my quest. Otherwise, if no one has anything else, we can enjoy the summer, I guess. And yeah, I look forward to coming back in September at some point and hearing what we all got up to over the summer. Okay then. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice summer. See you next year.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks all.